Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and here we break down complex issues around health, the climate crisis, and social justice through a vegan lens. We'll talk about the magic link between your well being and the planet's health, because luckily, choosing a healthier, mindful lifestyle for yourself often creates healthier vibes for our planet too. Staying consciously clueless means getting to show up knowing nothing, but staying open to all that you can learn. From feasting on plant-based meals and reducing waste to learning to meditate, every step you take contributes to your wellness and makes systematic change for the world. You can make a difference. This podcast will show you how. I have followed you on social media for a while and have been inspired by your work, and usually when that happens, when someone's inspiring me, I want to talk to them more. So that is why you are here.
Oh, I appreciate that. I could say with all honesty, I post on social media as if nobody's paying attention or if nobody's,
Healthy.
it keeps me grounded
Mhm.
because, and this is going to sound strange, but a lot of times people treat me like I'm a celebrity and I don't like that. Like
Hmm.
they'll call me an influencer. Like people will see me on the street and stop me on the street and they're like, I follow you. I appreciate what you say, what you post. And I'm like, I don't even give a lot of thought to that. I mean, believe me when I say this, everything I say,
Mhm.
but I just, again, I post as if I'm talking to myself and nobody's listening. So when somebody stops me or somebody sees me in a restaurant and they're telling me about something I posted a week or two ago or whatever, it's, oh, okay, so people are paying attention. And it's scary. So I just rather not think about it and just focus on like the work, you
Does it
know?
make you uncomfortable? Is it hard to get that feedback?
Does it make me uncomfortable?
Yeah,
It
like
doesn't.
getting looked like in public, or someone being like, "Hey, I saw your post. You're this person that I follow."
N- No, it doesn't make me uncomfortable. It's just, it's like one of those moments where it's like, how does this person even know me? Oh, yeah,
Right.
social media. And I'm always with a friend and they're like, oh my God, you're famous. I'm like, I'm not famous. It's just a coincidence.
But maybe a sign that even if you're just talking to yourself, the work you're putting out there is being heard.
I sincerely hope so. Because, like I said, everything I say, and I hope that it's resonating with somebody out there in social media world because this is how we facilitate change through
Mhm.
our messaging through creativity and art. So I hope somebody's, I don't know, I take that back. I do post, but I do keep people in mind, but that's when I think I'm sharing something that people might like laugh at or think
Mm.
I'm crazy. If I do a poem or something I drew, and I'm probably thinking somebody thinks I'm an asshole for like even sharing this, for having the audacity to share. Anyway, I'm sorry. You can continue with your questioning.
Don't apologize. That's why we're here. So your Instagram handle, just keep talking about social media, is vigilante vegan.
Mm,
And I would love to start with your vegan journey and how you got to that point.
okay. When I was a kid, I worked in food service and I worked my job every night was to season boxes of chicken, like whole chickens. Because in the morning, like where I worked, they would put first thing in the morning, they would put rotisserie chickens in the oven to get them going. And my job at night was to season 10 boxes of chicken, all different flavors. It was 14 chickens to a box. So it was like 140 chickens every night I had to season. Lemon pepper, barbecue, all these different flavors. 18, 19 years old. And that's for me, that's when the gears started turning
Mm.
because I started to ask myself, how is it possible that every night we have this many chickens coming in? Because in my naive 18-year-old mind, I thought a farm was like what Old McDonald said:
Mm.
blue sky, red barn, a couple of chickens, a cow, a goat, a friendly farmer who loves everybody. In my 18-year-old naive mind, it wasn't until some years later where that false narrative was shattered and I became exposed to what factory farming is.
Mm.
And it ain't on McDonald's. So I was horrified. I said, I can't believe like this is what we do to animals for the sake of eating them. And I didn't go vegan right then and there. Like I went vegan when I was 31. I'm 44 now. I went vegan when I was 31. This was in 2011. So it took me some years before I actually transitioned into a full-fledged vegan. And then years later, before I became an activist. So at 31 years old, I'm sitting at dinner. My wife prepared dinner, and I'm looking at this leg quarter on the plate. And I remember looking at this leg quarter, this piece of chicken, and I'm saying to myself, this is a piece of an animal. This is a part of a whole animal that died screaming, that did not live 1 ounce of happiness in their entire life, just so I could sit here and have their flesh. And like this, it was like you ever hear people having an epiphany? That's
Mhm.
almost what it felt like. And that moment, I felt guilt, I felt anger, I felt sadness, and I didn't eat that night. My wife was really upset with me. I ate everything else on the plate. I don't remember what it was. But the next morning I woke up and I Googled vegan nutrition, nutrition facts, where to get protein, where to get fiber, all my vitamins, things like that. And it was pretty much, I didn't look back after that. And my wife couldn't understand it, but I knew I was making the right decision because I just watching those videos and knowing what those animals were going through just for our sake, and then thinking about all these commercials that an advertisement that push this idea like this is what you want. You seen the McDonald's commercial, they make it very appealing to family and kids.
Mhm.
And yeah, it just woke me up to the reality that, behind the scenes, behind all of this clever marketing and commercials is just the grim reality of what happens to animals. And yeah, and like shortly after that, I started becoming an activist because I realized, yeah, it's cool that I'm not eating animals anymore, but everybody else still is. And I think everybody else deserves to know the truth of what's happening.
I appreciate you sharing your story, and I also appreciate that you shared that there was maybe some wheels turning 18, 19, working in that food service job, but then you went vegan at 31. And I think that's helpful to remind people that there takes some unlearning and some shedding of social conditioning. And sometimes that happens for people overnight as the thought comes in their head. And sometimes that's a journey.
It is. And it took me a long time because it wasn't something that I thought about every day from like the time I was 18 to the time I was 31.
Right.
Things happen and but life happens, right? But I like telling that story. It's a true story, and I like telling that story because I think a lot of times vegans get caught up in this idea that once I open my mouth and I tell people what happens, they're going to magically turn vegan. And it doesn't work that way, not all the time. And I know people personally that once they figured out what happened, like in factory farms and what happens to animals, like they go vegan immediately and then they burn out and then they go
Yeah.
back to being omnivores and carnivores and things like that. Is because a lot of times when you take that information and try to run with it as hard as you possibly can, you experience extreme burnout to the point where you drive yourself crazy because everybody around you is like normalizing violence. Everybody's still eating meat, everybody's still eating dairy, and you're telling everybody why it's important that we go vegan, and you're being aggressive about it, and you don't see the change happening. You automatically start to lose faith in that, and then it's F it all. I'm done with this. I've seen it happen plenty of times, and I'm glad that we always say I wish I went vegan sooner. A lot of people say that. I'm glad I went vegan when I did. Of course, it would be nice if I would have been vegan when I was younger, but I'm glad I went vegan when I did because if it would have happened sooner, I probably would have experienced the same thing and really not sit with the idea of this selfishness of eating animals. And I probably would have just gave up on it.
That's such a good point because I've had that thought too of, oh, the only regret I have is not doing it sooner. But I similarly had years of figuring things out. For me in the beginning, it was health, and then the dominoes kept falling in that direction. But I think you're right because even when I did decide to go vegan, that first year, I was on such a rampage that I did almost burn out just in general or push people away in my life because not everyone was doing what I wanted them to. Turns out that's not how it works.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of us have to get that out of our heads that we really don't have control over what people do. We could talk until we're blue in the face. We can give them all of the facts in the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean somebody's going to change overnight. That they're going to see things the way you see it immediately and change overnight. It doesn't happen like that all the time. It takes a while for people to like really get it and have that what they call an aha moment. And the pieces start to fall into place. It's wow, now it's time to transition. Now it's time to change.
What was your first foray into activism then? So you were vegan and then you wanted to do more because you wanted to spread the message. What did that early activism look like?
Okay, I'll tell you my first, not really activism, but I count it nowadays. When I was 12 years old, people in my neighborhood, they knew I loved animals. They knew I loved cats. I would feed the cats, the stray cats in the neighborhood. These kids came up to me one day and crying, like with panic. You got to come to the back of the building. Ronnie is killing kittens. And I remember running to the back of my building, and this kid from my neighborhood, Ronnie, I'll never forget his name. He was in the back of the building, and excuse me, because I'm going to be a little graphic,
Mhm.
but it was almost like a trail of kittens led me to where he was. And when I caught up to him, with tears in my eyes, I just remember just beating the hell out of this kid, crying, like almost like Ralphie in Christmas Story when he beat up Scarred Farkas.
Mhm.
And I'm beating on this kid and I'm crying and yelling and screaming. And he ran off, but I was so upset that he hurt these animals. And I didn't know what to do with myself. And I remember sitting there crying, like just in my own thoughts. But I tell people nowadays that's my first animal, my activism. That's where it started. But in all reality, it had to be around 2014. And the circus was still, the circus wasn't banned yet in New York. I live in New York. I'm in Brooklyn to be specific.
Mhm.
And at the time, I was working for a company, Mondelez Incorporated, Kraft. And my job was to go to different stores and stock the shelves with Oreo cookies and everything that Mondelez owned, like that Nabisco brand,
Mhm.
the Nabisco branch of their company. Anyway, so right across the street from the Barclays Center was a Pathmark. And when I left that night, I was walking towards the Barclays Center to get on the train, and there were some activists outside. They were handing out leaflets and coloring books. And I asked them, I was like, what are you guys doing here? They were like, we're protesting the circus. And I'm like, can I join you? Can I? And they were so happy, like they were cheering. They were like, yes, please. And they gave me a handful of pamphlets, and here I am just handing them out to people, like trying to get them to like turn around. Don't go to the circus. They abuse animals. There were little kids there. They had little kids there handing out coloring books to like other little kids that were going to the circus. I didn't know anybody that day. I didn't get anybody's name. But that was my first real form of activism. And I felt strongly about the circus because years before that, me and my wife took my daughter to the circus at Madison Square Garden.
Mhm.
And when we left, we had such a good time. And when we left, there was this woman standing there with this big 6-foot poster with this picture of an elephant. It had the name, their birth date, and it was talking about what the circus had done to this poor animal and why they were to be held accountable for their death. And I felt so bad that we went to the circus after seeing this lone woman standing there. I don't know who she is, but she changed my life. So
Wow.
here I am, 2014, handing out leaflets and things like that. And I forgot how I found it, but I seen a video of a protest, and I said, I need to be there. So I reached out I messaged the person that posted the video, and I asked him like, hey, like, how do I get involved in this? How do I join you? Do you guys have jobs? Like, I was one of those people, get a job. What are you doing out here? You need a job. I really thought activists like that did not have
Yeah.
jobs. And he said, no, we do all types from all different walks of life, and gave me some information. And it's pretty much been like off to the races from there. Like I've been an activist full time since about 2016. This is like a couple of years later. So yeah, around 2016.
So through this journey of going vegan and then not only that, but becoming a vegan activist, how has that affected the relationships in your life or people that maybe don't understand, or did that come up for you as you were engaging on that journey?
I always hear these vegan horror stories of dealing with family and friends. I never had any of those issues. Like everybody's always been very supportive of me. People have told me how I influenced them to eat better and things like that. So when people seen that I started to become more active in the fight for animal rights, it's been nothing but support. Like people even ask me, please let me know when the next time you do this, I want to come with you. So I don't have, unfortunately, or unfortunately, however you take it, I don't have these stories of like people pushing back or like this resistance. I'm a big family anyway. And I just, that's something I never really had to deal with. Everything has always been like really like positive as far as like people and how they react to me being a vegan and an animal rights activist.
That's beautiful. I don't want horror stories just for the podcast, so I'm glad that you have had supportive people in your life because, like you said, there are so many stories of that not being the case. So it's lovely that we hear that can be the case as well. Another title you carry is author,
Mhm.
and I want to talk a little bit about that because you are the author of a children's book, and that has led to, I think, another lane of activism that you do with young people, and I want to hear more about that.
The book you're referring to is Liberation Summer. So I go to New York City schools, public schools, and I talk to kids about these important issues because the character in the book, Jaden, is a young high school student who is about to attend college. He has to pay for his tuition. He has to pay for his books. He ends up getting a job in food service. The book is loosely based on my experience. So this young boy gets a job. He's working in food service, starts to question the practices within the industry. And that led him down a rabbit hole of just finding information and finding out the truth of what happens to animals for the sake of like human consumption. And he becomes a vegan and an activist in the book. I don't want to give the whole thing away, but yeah, that book made it to the hands of Ingrid Newkirk, of all people, who's the founder of PETA. And she called me and she said they wanted to give me an award. And she was speaking to me on the phone and we're talking about the award and all this other stuff. And she said, this book that you wrote, she said, I want you to go to schools and talk to kids about this. And I'm on the phone with Ingrid Newkirk, who I've met before. And I'm saying, like me, I'm the kind of person, I don't believe anything until I see it. So she's telling me, I want you to go to schools. And I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever.
You're like, that's a nice idea.
Yeah, yeah. I thought it was a really, I'm like, that, imagine that. Wow. Me going to school and talking to kids. Wow. Imagine that. And I get a call a couple of weeks later from one of the people at TeachKind, which is like a subsidiary organization of PETA. And they were laying out this whole plan. And I'm like, wow, she wasn't kidding. She really wants me to go to school and talk to kids. But the beautiful thing about it is I talk to kids in communities that I can relate to, basically people of color, like Black and brown kids. Because a lot of times when we hear this vegan message, it comes from white voices.
Hmm.
So a lot of people have a misconception that veganism is this white thing. I used to hear that a lot. Like veganism is the white thing, animal rights, that's a white thing. So I thought it was very important that I do this work, that I speak to kids that can relate to me, that look like me, and I look like them, and it doesn't come across as like some white person, a white savior, as you if you will.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times when the messaging is coming from those white voices, it does come across kind of preachy and I'm here to save you. So you have this Black man speaking to Black children about these important issues regarding animals and regarding their health and their community and environment. Yeah, and it's been wonderful to go to school and talk to kids about these important issues and have those conversations and have them ask me questions. It's wonderful. I love every minute of it. I prefer this form of activism over just about anything else that I've ever done.
Mm.
But I just want to add that Liberation Summer was the second book that I wrote. Actually, it's the third book that I wrote, but it's the second children's book. The first one is Kayla the Vegan. So there's that one and then Liberation Summer. But I was pushing for Kayla to be taught in schools, like, but they wanted to go with Liberation Summer. So that's what we're doing right now.
I know you've got so many, but what kind of reactions or responses are normal from these students that you're talking to, talking about, is veganism new to them? Is this wild? What is that
Not new to a lot of people because a lot of kids tell me that they have vegan uncles or vegan cousins
like?
or their family, their parents are vegan. But the overall response has been very positive. And I'm not just saying that for the sake of your show. I'm saying that because when I go to schools, I ask the children after they read the book, I said, how do you feel about it? Do you like it? Do you not like it? And be honest. And a lot of kids will all will raise their hand. There's only one time in the last 2 years where one child told me that he didn't like the book. He said he just didn't find it interesting, which is fair. Not everything is going to pique everybody's interest.
Right.
But the overwhelming response has been very positive, and I hope I'm not jinxing myself by saying that. But kids get it, and it's easier. I feel like it's easier to speak with them than to speak to adults who have already been indoctrinated into a belief and feel that they have to protect that belief and get defensive when you're speaking to them. But with children, they're very open-minded, and I realize why people don't want children to speak as often as they do is because number one, they don't have a filter and they say things that a lot of times we don't want to hear. And they're not doing it out of to be malicious. They're doing it just because they're still learning and still evolving. So they say things sometimes that we cringe at or we get offended by. But they're very inquisitive. And while they're inquisitive, I think it's my job to pique their interest with issues like this, issues surrounding how we treat animals and how we treat our environment and our health. So it's like I said, I enjoy it.
I'm so glad you said calling it a form of activism, because of course it is, but I think sometimes we get these ideas of activism being these like really certain particular acts or types of activities. And going to public schools in New York City and talking about this book and teaching about Liberation Summer is a form of activism. And there's so many different ways we can make a difference that we don't always think of all those different lanes as open.
Yeah, there are many different forms of activism. And I think for some people, just being out there in the streets it gives them a high and they feel like they're accomplishing something by being loud and using their voice for the animals. And there's nothing wrong with that. But one thing I try to like a message I try to get across to people is to like be creative. Like we could all do the same thing. Like I'll give you a good example. Like at some point, I would say around 2015, 2016, when like social media really, especially Instagram, really started to like become more popular. We started to see like the emergence of activists like Joey Carbstrong and Earthling Ed and these guys that like to stand out in the streets and debate people, which is cool. It's not my thing, but I think a lot of people saw that and saw the cool talking points and how articulate and charismatic these guys were with their speech that a lot of people tried to emulate what they were doing.
Mm.
And you see a lot of that now where people will set up a table outside and record themselves debating other people. Listen, I'm not interested in debating anyone about anything regarding animals. I'm not here to high five myself because I told some meat eater the truth about factory farming and they have no argument against me. I'm more concerned with education and creativity and teaching people why it's important that we go vegan rather than debating someone and winning an argument. And one thing, and me personally, because we don't all learn the same, I could not sit in a classroom and learn anything. I dropped out of high school because of that.
Mhm.
Everything that I've ever learned in my life was through arts,
Mm.
whether it was music, whether it was poetry or visual art. I'm a visual learner. And anything that I've ever learned and that I use in my daily life, I learned from listening to John Lennon, from Care to KRS-One, Public Enemy. That was how I learned. So I learned how to use creativity as a vessel to push a message. So if I could teach kids why it's important how we treat animals and put it in a story form where they could relate to the character and they could relate to the dialect and the words being used in the book and create scenarios that they're familiar with for them to get it, then I'm for that. If I could create a poem that people would listen to, like a lot of people listen to music, a lot of people like poetry. So I figure instead of talking and trying to preach to people, let me put it in a poetic way to where it will resonate more with people. So I'm always thinking, well, disruptions are good, protests are good, marching, all of that is great. But I feel like my strong point, the way I get my message across is using art. And I'm big on that. If there was one thing I could hope to get across to like your listeners, if they're interested in doing activism, is try to
Mhm.
be creative in what you do. Like I started a group back in 2019 called Voice for Change, a poetry group, and we do poetry on the streets. We do That's our form of activism. I created these signs so that it gives people attention as to what we're doing. And when they're drawn in and they listen to what we're saying, we have a better chance of getting these people to listen to what we're saying because we're using music, we're using poetry, we're using dance, hip hop as a way of conveying that message of animal rights. And it's that in itself to me is always fun, it's always engaging. And again, it's not me following what somebody else did. It's just me using my mind to create something that other people could probably take something from or benefit from. So I'm always an advocate for using creativity as a form of activism.
Gosh, I love that so much, and I think that it's probably why it's probably why you get recognized on the street once in a while, or you have people like me being like, "Damn, I'm really inspired by you," because it's authentically you're not trying to regurgitate someone else's form of saying in very important things, but it feels authentically you when it's coming from that place of creating your own art, creating your own work.
Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Because again, I do and say things, but I don't sit there and count how many people I've influenced or converted. So it's good. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You mentioned how important it can be in these public schools with primarily Black and brown kids, and you being someone who can relate as a person of color because of veganism being seen as a white thing or animal rights being seen as a white thing. Do you think that has shifted with your time in veganism or as an activist?
Somewhat, yeah. Like I hear this narrative being thrown around that the Black community is the largest growing demographic of vegans, and that might be true to some degree. And if that's the truth, then it's what's the word I'm looking for? It's disappointing because if you think about it, African Americans, so-called African Americans, make up somewhere between 13 to 14% of the total United States population. The majority of people in the United States are Caucasian. If the largest growing demographic is Black folks, people of color, what does that say about the rest of the country? Why isn't the rest of the country going vegan? But in some regard, I've seen the shift. Like I see it on social media a lot more. There's a lot more like foodie influencers that happen to be people of color, specifically women, that have pretty much turned veganism into a business. And I have mixed feelings about that, but I see the shift there. But overall, it's pretty much the same thing. Like a lot of folks still believe that it's a privilege for someone to be vegan. And I think a lot of that is in the promotion and marketing of veganism. And I'll give you an example. When you look at something like quinoa, 20 years ago, nobody knew what the hell quinoa was. And all of a sudden, it's on your supermarket shelf and it's called a superfood. And the reason for that is because white people found out about quinoa to market it as such. Quinoa is an indigenous food. Like people have been eating this for thousands of
It's
years.
not new.
It's not new, but it's new to us. And I think a lot of times when we come across these ancient ancient cultures and their ways, like when you look at yoga, when you look at eating plant-based, when you look at holistic healing and all these other things, these are not new concepts, but once it's been westernized and commercialized and commodified, it becomes like this new thing. Now you can't afford it because capitalism has taken control of it.
Yep.
So to a lot of people, they look at these things like, oh, it's too expensive. Quinoa is expensive. What is Himalaya pink salt? Why is that expensive? All these healthier options and things that we look at as like beneficial to us have become priced out in certain communities. So now people think in order for me to eat healthy, I have to spend more money. And that's not necessarily the case. And I think that's why education is important
Hmm.
because a lot of folks think, oh, only white privileged folks could go vegan because they're the ones that can afford this stuff. And in that regard, it doesn't help veganism. It doesn't help anything because you just frustrate people into thinking I have to be wealthy in order to be healthy. Or that rhyme. I wasn't even trying to rhyme and I rhymed. But yeah, I think we have to do a better job of educating people. We have to bring agriculture back to our communities. And I see that a lot now in places like Bed-Stuy and Fort Greene here in Brooklyn that were historically Black communities. They have community gardens now. They're teaching kids how to grow their own food so they don't have to be dependent on supermarkets. They don't have to be dependent on other people to grow food for them. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And this is something that they even teach in school. The school that I went to today, they have a hydroponic farm. Yeah, they're teaching kids how to grow their own vegetables. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So again, it goes back to educating people as to why it's important. And no, it's not a white thing. It's an everybody thing. We all benefit from going vegan, like all species, the environment, but it comes down to teaching people how to find healthy plant-based options regardless of your budget.
Right.
And I think we're moving in that direction, and hopefully the work that I'm doing in the schools will help push us in that direction as well.
I'm glad you said that work in the schools again because I thought of this earlier. Is that a program that's just happening in New York with your book, or is that something that will be growing? Because I'm like, oh my gosh, where else can this happen? Can we get this in Minnesota?
I'm pretty sure somebody somewhere is doing this work. I don't know, but as far as New York, I think I am the only one. Humane education isn't anything new. It is something that exists and people are doing the work. Like PETA has their way of doing things, and there's other folks doing this work as well. Just last week, there was a school here in Brooklyn in Bed-Stuy. They had an organization come to the school, PS59, and they had a taste sampling event, and everything was vegan. Everything was 100% vegan, and it gave that community a chance to experiment with different options and get more information. And that in itself is a form of education. That in itself is a form of humane teaching. What I do is a little different. What I do is based on the book that I wrote. And I go in and I talk to kids about having compassion for animals. It exists, but as far as like the book tours are concerned, I'm probably the only one in New York doing this right now. And if there's somebody else out there, I don't know. I would like to know if there is someone else out there. I could be 100% wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. I hope there are other people out there doing this work.
I think it's pretty incredible to be talking, like we were talking before, to those younger people, to a generation that hasn't, I think you said it perfectly, gets defensive in their beliefs.
Mhm.
And the idea of being able to reach that population, it intrigues me so much. It's in a different way why I love talking about mindfulness to young people that I get to teach yoga to, because kindergartners can tell you what anxiety feels like in their bodies and what it feels like to be overwhelmed, and having those conversations with young people just is so hopeful that I love hearing about your work in the schools, quite honestly.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's really inspiring. My question is hopeful in terms of I hope that there is more of that work happening and we can see whether it's your book or other activists doing more of that work with that younger population, and in public schools too is pretty remarkable.
Yeah. And like I said, the overall reception has been super positive from the staff to the students. because we take all of that into account when I leave a school. We take all of that into account. We communicate with the staff and get their feedback.
Mhm.
And it's a good thing because if there's areas that I can improve, let's improve them. If it's working, then let's keep doing it. But everything's been great. Like the I don't have anything negative to say about the experience. And hopefully moving forward, I don't experience anything negative or have any negative feedback about it. It's been wonderful. And hopefully I'm changing a lot of young minds, and hopefully they're taking this message home and inspiring their family as well. And I'm going to share something with you that kind of correlates with what I'm saying. Are you familiar with Genesis Butler?
Mhm.
Okay. Genesis has been vegan since she was about 6 years old or something like that. She's been an activist for like most of her life. She's about, she might be about 16 or 17 years old now. I watched the documentary a couple of years before writing Kayla the Vegan. And in fact, Kayla the Vegan was inspired by something that Genesis Butler said. I was watching this documentary, and she was talking about how the kids in her school were treating her pretty badly because she was vegan. Like they would throw salami slices at her and make fun of her, and all just kids can be cruel sometimes. And that inspired me to write a book about her experience, but giving the character different names and stuff like that. And I read how Genesis inspired her family at 6 years old to go vegan. Now her mother Janelle is vegan. There's her siblings are vegan because of this one lone 6-year-old girl.
Damn.
And she inspired her whole family. And now she's inspiring other children. I think Genesis is a wonderful young girl who's doing a lot of great things in the world as far as environmental issues are concerned, as far as teaching people why it's important to go vegan. She's been a big inspiration for me. This little at 6 years old, this girl's inspiring adults. Yeah, hopefully I'm creating 11-year-old Genesis Butlers
Mm.
that will take the information that I'm giving them and take it home and take it into their communities and help people to become more aware of the choices that they make in regards to what we eat and how they impact the lives of animals and how they impact our environment. Hopefully.
So, in terms of white veganism and the big marketing problem, I think, with the movement in general, and like we said, all the things commodifying, that the idea of this, the word liberation in the title of the book made me think of this idea of collective liberation in veganism. And it's not often maybe a starting point for people learning about veganism. Like we're often learning about food, we're often learning about animals. And so that word in that title feels very intentional. And do you talk about that concept when you're going with these young people as well?
Yeah, because one of the quotes in the book is liberate your mind, liberate humanity, liberate animals. So the whole idea behind Liberation Summer is I gave it that title because this young man started to change his life over the course of a summer. And liberation to me means a lot of things. You know, it means self-determination, it means freedom, it means happiness, it means to be without restraint. And that's what we all strive for. A lot of people talk about animal liberation, but when we talk about collective liberation, which I think is really important and pretty much shunned to some degree in the animal rights community, we have a section. Like you can't talk about women's rights without talking about racism or transphobia or homophobia. You can't talk about environmental issues without addressing the issues as it pertains to indigenous folks or how it pertains. You could talk about environmental issues and how it impacts animals, but people don't want to talk about the reverse. And I think that all of these conversations are very important because, like I said, at some point they all interconnect. When we talk about animal rights, animal liberation, we can't leave out food insecurity. We can't leave out environmental racism because these things have an impact on certain communities in different ways. And that's not to be ignored. And a lot of people will say they don't want to make humans the focal point of these discussions. And it's really not about making human beings the focal point of these discussions. It's about inclusion, okay? Because we can't help one without helping the other. That doesn't make sense. I don't understand how people would be comfortable living in a world where animals have rights and animals are liberated. They're free from factory farms, they're free from fur farms and circuses and zoos, but we still have racism, we still have sexism, women are still being oppressed. Like, I don't understand how people are comfortable living in a world like that. And at the end of the day, we're animals as well. And I think that we have issues that should be addressed as well. And I think helping address those issues will help us to understand our relationship to animals and our relationship to the environment and why all of these things are so important. We can't leave out one. Liberation isn't, for me, isn't just about Black folks or animals. It's about everybody, even communities that I don't belong to.
Yeah.
And I truly believe in that. And I really wish that a lot more vegan activists would understand how important that is too, because from an outsider looking in, and I've seen videos about this where people of color are attacking the vegan community because of the racism, because of the homophobia and all these other things, the ableism. I've seen it because it looks very privileged. And a lot of times I think a lot of folks just try to keep it to themselves. Like, this is my chance to build a platform for myself. This is my chance to amplify my own voice and call myself the savior. So I can't talk about these other issues because it'll take away from my messaging and my attention. We can't talk about the environment because that doesn't bring me any attention. And I think that when you get involved in activism, you have it's an act of selflessness. It's not about you. It's about us as a community. It's about us as a universal family. And if you're in this for yourself, if you're doing this because you want the clout or you want attention, you're in it for the wrong reasons. And when you try to ignore these intersections of suffering, we do the animals a further injustice.
Yeah, I
I,
so appreciate
I'll find myself rambling. I'm sorry.
No, you're not rambling. I always forget that I'm usually just sharing the audio. So me over here bobbling up and down like a bobblehead, agreeing with you is not much feedback, but I'm like, yep. And I appreciate it. Listeners of the podcast run the gamut of being vegan and already being with the message or learning about it. And I think that especially when learning about it, or hell, even for people who've been in the movement, the more conversations and reminders we have about this that dispel some of that commodified version of veganism is important in really unraveling systems of oppression and not just doing ego-based work like you're describing. This isn't getting me clout, which is shitty.
Yeah, again, for some reason, for some people, it's like that, and I've seen it firsthand. I see it on social media, but I've seen it here in the streets of New York as well. There's a lot of organizers here that put themselves first, that put people in compromising positions because it benefits them. People make this about themselves, but that's in every movement. I see it in every movement. Like, people like to make things about them because they like the idea of being a leader and people following them or people pushing them up further as a voice. And a lot of times I feel like the message gets lost. When you start to make it about yourself and the individual, it's not about the animals anymore. And that could be completely dangerous. And I'll tell you why that's dangerous, because a lot of these influencers that people follow, their followers do not leave room for error. So I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about without using names. Let's just say activist A was your introduction to veganism. You came across a video with activist A, and he's talking all of these great and wonderful things, and he's telling you what veganism is and what veganism isn't. You're going to go by this person's every word, and it's going to become gospel. So when somebody pushes back on anything that activist A says, you get mad at this other person for challenging the person that introduced you to veganism.
Got it.
And that's why a lot of activists, and I don't know if you were going to go here or not, but I'm very big on language and how it's used. So when you have activists out in the streets using words like slavery, rape, and Holocaust, in their activism to try to convince people why they should go vegan. And you have somebody like me that pushes back against that. Like all of a sudden, I'm the bad guy now
Right.
because the guy you were looking up to, he says Holocaust all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. He says rape all of the time. There's nothing wrong with that. But when somebody like me comes along and says, you have to be really mindful of people's experiences in life. Like me as a person of color, as a black man, like I could not see myself on the streets trying to talk to, let's say, a Jewish family about going vegan, and I compare what happens to cows to the Holocaust.
Right.
Who am I to make that comparison? If they want to make that comparison on their own, that's on them. But who am I to appropriate the suffering of their people to them so that they can understand what happens to animals? Who am I to say, oh, they rape cows on dairy farms with a rake rap or a rape rack? I don't know if I'm talking to somebody that's experienced that might trigger them. If they're triggered, you think they want to hear anything else I have to say?
Right.
This all goes back to what I'm saying about people's introduction into veganism. People that you look up to are talking like this, a lot of people will defend it and say, no, they're not wrong. And I'm telling you, I don't agree with that. That's not my approach. I think you can still get the message across without using certain language. Again,
I think that is so relevant because language matters. And I'm looking up just today, I saw a post from Apex Advocacy, and Christopher Soul Eubanks has been on the podcast before.
shout out Eubanks.
Yeah, shout out for sure. And this is a word that's new to me. They posted this today. Theriocide.
What's that?
Theriocide. Theriocide. And
Um,
you have to check out this post. It addresses exactly what you just said, that what is the most appropriate term to describe the systematic killing of non-human animals by humans, and using genocide and Holocaust and these other words can be appropriating in these other ways, like you were saying, talking to the Jewish family, right? And so this word is apparently what describes, and the language to start using, the systematic killing of animals in this way.
okay, that's new to me.
Me too. I saved this post. It came out 7 hours ago, but just since that came up today.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see what they mean by that.
Yeah, I need to engage with it more too. Given all of the work that you do, how do you take care of yourself when it feels overwhelming or it feels too hard? Or maybe even when it feels like a good day, how do you take care of yourself?
A lot of times you have to like draw back a bit and take care of yourself because just like your body, your mind wears down and breaks down as well. And you have to be there for yourself. You have to be present for yourself and show the same kindness that you would to animals to yourself. And you do that, whatever your hobby is. Like me personally, I like drawing, I like painting, I like writing. So I'll get lost in that, just the creative world. I think a lot of times it goes back to what we were talking about kids. Kids have an element of freedom. Again, they're not like fully indoctrinated. They have their own thoughts and ideas. And I think like when we become adults and we start paying taxes and working and we get lost in that world where we have to get up and hustle. You got to get up, you got to go to work, you got to take care of your kids, you got to do this, you got to do that. And you have these other outside interests that you're involved in, whatever that is. I think a lot of times we have to come back to our childlike self, the things that we enjoyed as children. I encourage people nowadays, like I said, I'm 44. I encourage people my age, do the things you love to do when you were a kid. Pick up a piece of paper and pen and draw again. Go ride a bike. Go shoot some basketball. Whatever it is, don't lose that child hand or that child mind because in a lot of ways it's healthy because it's a reminder that life isn't really supposed to be serious all the time and that we do have the right to enjoy ourselves and we do have the right to be creative and our creations don't always have to have a meaning to it. Like we can just create for the sake of our mental health. So a lot of times I go back into the creative realm because me personally, I've dealt with depression for a large part of my life. Even when I didn't know what it was, I just know I was sad all the time and that I didn't have the energy or the interest to do anything. And a lot of times I find my way out of it by just writing down how I feel, expressing my thoughts. A lot of times those thoughts become poems. A lot of times those thoughts and ideas become inspiration for a story or a drawing. So that's how I deal with it. Like when I know I'm feeling burnt out, I don't feel guilty about it at all. Like a lot of people feel really guilty. Like they feel like they owe their life to whatever struggle they attach themselves to. And while that's noble, I think it's very important that you also take care of yourself. And
Mhm.
I think it's important that we normalize that as well. Like me as an activist, like I will post about my activism, but I will also post about making goofy videos with my kids just to show people like, listen, while we're fighting for what we're fighting for, fight for you as well. Take care of yourself. Laugh, smile, do things that bring a sense of fulfillment to your life. Like life doesn't always have to be serious all the time.
It's a really good reminder. Is there any last thing that you want to share with listeners that I haven't given you space to do?
I would just leave you with this. Feed your inner child. Whatever, and also whatever you're into, like your hobbies, lend your creativity to whatever your cause is.
Mm,
Because like I said, a lot of times the messaging comes from a creative and artistic space. Think of the first time you ever heard Imagine by John Lennon. Think of anything you've ever heard by Bob Marley that talked about people together. They were activists. They weren't out on the street marching and yelling, but they were in their own right, they were activists. They lent their creativity to their cause. They took the things that they loved the most, making music, and decided to change the world with that creativity. Listen, John Lennon could have made songs about anything and it could have been a hit record. He decided to make songs about bringing people together. How beautiful is that? When you could use your creativity to inspire people to come together and love each other. And that's what I want to leave your listeners with. Just lend your creativity to your cause, but also be mindful of yourself and take care of yourself as well. Love yourself as much as you love fighting for what you're fighting for. Because in essence, you're fighting for yourself.
thank you for that. It's been on my mind a lot lately as taking care of myself is a form of activism to keep going.
Yeah, it absolutely is. You have to take care of yourself.
If you're hearing this message, you've listened to the entire episode of Consciously Clueless. And for that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, tag me when you share on social media, or share this episode with others who may be interested in the topic. Any sharing truly means the world to me. Join the community at patreon.com/consciouslycarly for bonus podcast content like smoke sessions with Consciously Cannabis guests, video versions of solo episodes, monthly live calls, one-to-one support, more lifestyle content, mindfulness resources, and more. Until next time, stay consciously clueless.